Hello, everyone. Welcome to Musings by Masha. It's a great honor for me to have a very special guest with us today. So we have Sherryl Smith with us, who many of you know as the person, the creator of the incredible Tarot-Heritage website and blog, where Sherryl shares and writes very informative, well-researched, insightful articles on tarot history and on historic tarot decks. Also, what many of you may not know is that Sherryl has been practicing tarot for over 50 years now, and the last 20 years Sherryl dedicated to research and practice and learning to practice, focusing on researching how to practice with historic decks as well. So I'm very excited. I'm very honored to welcome you here, Sherryl. Thank you so much for joining me.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I've been really looking forward to this. This is going to be exciting. So where do you want to start?
Yeah, absolutely. We have a lot to cover, right? I mean, you have incredible knowledge, and our friends here, they will learn that. And let's start from the very beginning. So we're talking about 50 years plus, right, of your story with tarot. So can you take us to the very beginning, right, going back to 50 plus years, how your first tarot deck and how you discovered tarot, and how that incredible over half a century now, right, story with tarot for you began.
Okay, well, I do have my first deck right here. I really discovered tarot, I think it was about 1972. I walked into a bookstore and there was a pile of decks on a table, and it was this deck. It was the Aquarian Tarot by David Palladini. And it's just lights and bells went off in my head, and I said, I got to buy this. I got to do this, And I must have known what tarot was, but I really don't recall being introduced to it before, which is kind of odd because I graduated from college in the late 1960s, and I immediately hopped on a Greyhound bus and went to San Francisco to join the hippie scene. And I really don't recall seeing tarot decks in San Francisco back then, but maybe I did. Maybe that's where I learned what it was. But so I tried reading with this deck for a couple of years. Let me show you some cards, and I really struggled with it. There's the faces, just they look like dead and zombie-like to me. And here's the high priestess, and she's kind of grumpy looking. And I really like the sun card, but I see this as mainly more of there's the world. It's kind of an Art Nouveau, Art Deco, decorative kind of deck. I found it hard to read with. And I think that it was published in 1970, and I think that it's probably one of the first decks where the artist did his own spin on the Waite Smith deck. That kind of creativity really started in the 1970s, and I think David Palladini was one of the first to do that. So I struggled with reading with that for a few years, and then I came across the Morgan Greer deck, which is like a borderless, takeoff on the Waite Smith, and I remember having that deck for a while. And then in the 1980s, decks like Mother Peace, and a little bit later, the Daughters of the Moon, both round decks, both very feminist, very goddess-oriented. And I really got into that, and all I really knew about tarot was what I would read in the little white books that came with the decks, or the book that came with the Mother Peace deck. And to me, being involved in tarot, it was like a witchy, pagan-y, counterculture, goddessy kind of thing to do. And I do have one round deck here. I think it's from about 1990. It's called, it's a very alternative deck. Here's the box. It's called The Songs for the Journey Home. And are you familiar with that?
No, not familiar with that one. No, I'm familiar with Mother Peace as the round, one of the earlier round decks.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah.
Well, This is the only round deck I would show those if I had them, but this is the only round deck I've held on to. And it was, and I still read with it. There's something about this deck that it gets to deep psychological issues. It really gets to the heart of matters. So I like doing like personal work with this deck. But it was done by two women from New Zealand. I think one was a therapist and one was a midwife. And just to show some of the cards, this is the Hangman, and he's a bungee jumper, but he's bungee jumping into a river that has sharks in it.
Wow. Yeah.
Not very.
Even the bridge looks like Sydney Harbour Bridge, like the bridge famous in Sydney. It's very, yeah. I wonder.
Maybe that inspired it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And here is this is one of my favorite cards, the High Priestess, and she really has fire in all three of her centers, all three of the major chakras, and kind of in the roots. And this is the Hermit. This is the kind of hermit I would like to be, by myself in an oasis, contemplating things. And that was that. And what's interesting is when you shuffle and deal these decks, like here is the Magician, you never know which way it's going to turn up. And so rather than worrying about upright or reversed or turning around, what I would do is focus on the top third of the deck. And I would just kind of set the intention that was where the main message was for me. And that, whatever it was that turned up at the top of the deck. So I think my next deck, which I read with for maybe about 25 years, was the Robin Wood deck, which is a takeoff. Wait, I made a little list of things here. I want to make sure I didn't skip something. It's a takeoff. It's kind of a Celtic pagan takeoff on the Waite Smith. So let's see. So there's like the Queen of Wands. I really like it. Just lots of fire and lots of power there. And Judgment, just transformation and rebirth, like the phoenix. And there's the Magician with a good set of antlers.
Yeah.
But actually, what is kind of odd about my early tarot career is whenever I get interested in something, I run to the library, I run to the bookstore, and I try to find books and I read all about it. And I didn't do that with tarot. I guess maybe it never occurred to me that there were books out there, and nobody ever told me that there were. So all I knew was basically what I did. I taught myself to read by memorizing the little white books that came. But actually, to give you an idea of what the tarot scene was back then, if I had gone to the bookstore and found a book, it might have been this book. It's called A Complete Guide to the Tarot by Eden Gray. And you guys may have heard of Eden Gray. She wrote her first tarot book in 1960, and then two others in the early 70s. So this is like a larger version of her first 1960 book. And what she did was there's line drawings from the Waite Smith deck, and then she gives a very brief description of what you see in the card, and then she gives upright and reversed meanings that are very much based on the image of the card. And she says in her introduction, she says, if you're going to read tarot, you don't need to know Kabbalah or astrology or numerology or, any of those systems that are really laid on top of the cards. You just need to engage with the image itself. And she's just very much oriented to the physical reality of the card. What's going on in the card? What's the story there? And it just occurred to me that things in a way have gone full circle for me, because some of the more recent people that I've studied with is like Enrique Enriquez and Camelia Elias, and they are all about just look at, in fact, Camelia's saying is she always says, just read the damn cards, don't bring in all this other crap, just look at the cards and read them. And that was really my interactions with Enrique. The way he taught, it was all by email, and I would pull some cards, tell him um, what I saw on the cards, and then he would at his end would pull the same cards and tell me what he saw, which was usually a lot wilder than crazier than what I saw. So it was very much just reading from the cards themselves and what the figures are doing and how they're interacting. And I find and watching my students give readings and watching other readings, that when people start drawing in other systems like astrology or whatever and saying, oh, well, you have the Virgo card here or something, all of a sudden the reading becomes wooden. It becomes forced somehow. And I've seen so much magic happen when you just stick closely to the image on the card and don't stray from that and just go deep into that, and all of a sudden it seems to touch something deep in the person that you're reading for. So Eden Gray kind of started that off. She said, all you need is a deck of cards, my book, a kitchen table, and a little compassion, and you're set as a reader.
And it's still very true, isn't it? Like I share that I did a course with Enrique and I studied with Camelia Elias. Well, I consider her one of my probably main tarot teachers. And what I do very much like the approach, the pictorial approach, that just learn to look and see and and learn to feel the temperature of the card. How Enrique talks about like expansion, contraction, heat, and coolness if you look at the pips. And it's actually quite amazing. Also, what I like about this approach, without adding like extra stuff, without adding astrology or occult references, is that people who we read for, they see the same thing that we are seeing. So we're not bringing in something that they completely cannot comprehend, right? But if we can explain the pattern, if we see in the pips, of course, with major arcana, it's just so universal that our querents, our sitters, they will see what we see if we use this approach of looking at the image and how the images interact with each other in the context of a given topic or question. Yeah, no, absolutely. So you mentioned that you started pretty much in the beginning just with the little white books because there was not much available, or you didn't really research in the library, and then you started with Enrique and Camelia. Do you have any other like learning tools or other teachers that you can mention, or resources that you would recommend to people who are either starting with the tarot journey or continuing, especially moving into more kind of historic and peep decks?
Yeah, that actually is a huge jump from the 1970s. It's just been the past few years that I've studied with Enrique. So we've got a 60-year jump in there. As far as like how I learned to read the Tarot-de-Marseille, I was going to say, if you want to stick with the Waite Smith deck, I think Mary Greer's books like Tarot for Yourself, and one book that my favorite person, I think, is called 31 Ways to Read a Tarot Card, and I can adapt it to the Tarot-de-Marseille. All different ways of engaging with the image and stuff. So I think that would be a very important book for anybody to read. As far as reading the Tarot-de-Marseille, there's a bunch of books out there that are really classics, like by Alejandro Jodorowsky, and trying to. You could probably think of them better than I can. My mind.
Well, you see, like my first one was You of Bendov, because that's how I discovered, the CBD tarot. Yeah, and then because I only came to Tarot-de-Marseille in 2016. I only discovered tarot in 2015. So yeah.
So Bendov's book, that's the one that that I always refer to. Like if I'm doing a reading for myself and I draw a blank, I go to his book because it is so down to earth, and it's he doesn't mix in a lot of extra philosophy or outside stuff. It's just very down to earth. So I would definitely his book. And there's I can't believe I can't I don't, because I always keep them out, but there's like about a half a dozen books on how to read the Tarot de Marseille, and Hodorowski is the only one I can think of. Most of the people who write them are French, but they've been translated into English. Um, so yeah, so I would say, yeah, find those books. There's a few Facebook pages, Facebook groups where people will share readings and
Mm,
stuff. Yeah, Camellia Elias is on Facebook. Enrique used to be. I don't know. Maybe I'm just not getting him, in my feed anymore. But they give classes from time to time.
mm,
Um, yeah, well, I learned back actually to start at the beginning of my Tarot de Marseille journey. um, I got on, everything changed for me tarot wise in 1999 when I got online. And first thing I did was I looked to see what was going on tarot wise on the internet. And back then, everything was on Yahoo groups. And a Yahoo group was sort of a lot like a Facebook group. Anybody could start one up for any special interest, and other people could join.
mm,
So there was a Yahoo group that was dedicated to tarot history, and a lot of very prominent historians were in it. Like Mary Greer was there, Robert Place, Paul Hewson, Ross Codwell, who he manages the Facebook Tarot History group. He
mm.
was there. Um, and that's where I was like, oh my God, tarot's been around since the 1500s, 1400s. Who knew? I sure didn't know. Um, so I just went on. I was on fire to know everything about Tarot's development and how it emerged back in the 1400s, um, and I just I took. In fact, I still have a folder full of notes that I took back then. Whenever anybody said anything that I didn't know, I wrote it down, um, and so my tarot path was kind of bipolar back then. I'm still reading with the Robin Wood deck, but I'm studying all this history, and it's nothing is really meshing. And it's about that time that I really got frustrated with decks that are fully illustrated. And I know there's some people who spend their entire lives with just the Waite Smith deck, and they go into really deeply and they see all these different angles, and it's a lifetime journey. But for me, I started feeling boxed in. Like the Three of Swords, you're stuck with the Bleeding Heart and the Three Swords, and you really can't get out of that box.
Mm,
So I started looking at the Tarot de Marseille, but I had the same prejudices that everybody else did. Like, how can you read pip cards that don't have pictures on them unless you just memorize a bunch of keywords, and that's not intuitive, that's boring. And and the court cards, kings and knights clanking around in their suits of armor, I couldn't relate to that. I don't know anybody who wears armor. So I just had the same thing. It's the decks are lovely, they're interesting, they're historical, but I don't see how anybody could read with them. And then everything changed about 2002 or 2003. A guy named Tom Little gave a class on how to read with the Tarot de Marseille. And he has since, I actually found a little bit about him on the internet where he's changed his name, he's gone in a completely different direction, dropped out of like the pagan community and the tarot community and everything. But back then he co-wrote a book on court cards with Mary Greer, and he was, really involved in the tarot community. And I think back then I took a class from him and also from Robert Place and from Jean-Michel David, who's
mm.
he's in Australia now. And and actually the handouts for his book were actually the rough draft of his, of his book,
Yeah, I've
that
got his book, the massive one, yeah, on Noblater,
yeah,
or
yeah, I
featuring
have a
Noblater.
massive one, but I also have it. He because of the technology back then, there was no, no Skype, no Zoom, nothing like that. I think our classes were conference calls on the telephone, and the
Mm.
teacher would email you attachments like PDFs with their handouts and stuff. So I've got Jean Michel's book as a PDF somewhere. So, but taking that class just turned me upside down, and all of a sudden I realized, yeah, you can read intuitively, with the Tarot-de-Marseille. In fact, a lot more intuitively, because you don't have these pictures shoved in your face telling
Mm.
you what you're supposed to be talking about. Um, so that set me off, and I've got, where did I put it? Um, my first deck that I read with, it wasn't a strict TDM. Back then, I maybe had about a half a dozen historic decks, and there was nothing in the United States. No Tarot de Marseille, no Visconti, there's
Mm.
nothing. So I ended up ordering decks from a place that still exists. It's called Alita Store, and it's in San Marino, which for you Californians is not the suburb of Los Angeles where the Huntington Gardens is. There is a San Marino in California, but this is like a country that's the size of 2 football fields that's embedded in Italy. And
Mm.
Alita Store, back then, you went to their website, and it was a blue screen with just tiny little white text, line after line of just listings of cards, no pictures, just, a blue screen, and this is crammed in text, and you told them what you wanted. Now they're like this new age emporium. They have like incense and crystals and every tarot deck you can think of, all the mass market decks. They've completely transformed themselves. But I had about a half a dozen decks, and I remember one afternoon I took half a dozen cards from each deck, and I spread them all out on my bed. And I said, okay, which one of you wants to be my main reading deck? And so this was the answer I got. This is the Italian version, but it's actually the
Okay.
ancient Italian tarot
I do
from.
it by my hand. You see, like how you mentioned, you spread the decks. That's how I do it. I put all the decks like on the floor, and then I use my left hand because my
Uh-huh.
left hand is smarter. And then I figure out which one got the most hit. That's how I choose my decks.
Oh,
Yeah.
in fact, that's how I pick my cards. So you probably do it too. If I'm reading one deck, I just fan out the cards, and I let my hand just be magnetically drawn to whatever card it's supposed to be.
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I. It's interesting though with fanning of the cards. I would only fan Sibilla decks. With tarot, I sometimes to put them on piles, but then which pile goes on top, it's the same method for me. Yeah,
Oh
yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and before you show the ancient Italian, I just wanted to mention, you mentioned the Three of Swords. It's well, like you see, I don't mind illustrated decks, but one of my pet peeves, right, and my close friends as well, who actually read with illustrated decks, is the Three of Swords card. Because it just, I mean, even like just thinking of heart and Three of Swords, swords are not even emotions, right? Why are we piercing the heart? It's like, what's the deal with that?
I know.
That's my little detour. But yeah, share a little bit about the ancient tarot that it was the deck that
Okay.
you used. Yeah.
And I've got to
Oh.
say, I can't stand the name. Lo Scarabeo does this. They rename everything, and they're really stupid names. When I think of ancient Italian, I think of Julius Caesar. I think of ancient Rome. I don't think of 1880s, Piedmont, which is where this
Hmm.
deck was printed. And so I'll start off with the moon card. This has everything in it that the Tarot de Marseille moon card has. You've got dogs, you've got a crustacean, you have the moon up there in the clouds, but it's totally wild. In fact, you have 2 towers there, but you've got a boiled lobster on a silver platter. What is that all about? I got this once reading for somebody, and I just laughed, and I said, I think you're supposed to have a seafood dinner near the beach. and and the death card, I love this card. I call this the decluttering card, um, because he's got like money and military medals, and there's a bishop's hat and an artist palette and books, and he's like, sweeping all this clutter away. And
Hmm.
whenever I get this card, I think, yeah, I gotta clean up some stuff. And also notice the name there, and the Italian decks especially, they're squeamish about saying death, putting that on a card. So either they don't give it a title at all, or they call it Il Tredici, which is 13 in Italian.
Hmm.
And then the World card, I think, is one of just really beautiful, really intricate. Um, and this deck was published in Piedmont in 1880, and in Piedmont back then, all of a sudden they had this flourishing of really intricate, beautiful decks. And Giordano Berti discovered some prototypes of some of these decks and revived them. Maybe a little bit later, I'll show you a couple of them. So this was part of that, of having just really luxurious, elaborate decks. And what this is, oh, before I go on to that, I'll show you. Here's what the pip card. In fact, here is the Three of Swords. No bleeding hearts, you know.
Mm.
um, so and then what I really like about it, he's like the Three of Coins. They're so expressive, especially for somebody like me who is just beginning to learn to read with pip cards. I read the flowers of the vegetation as much as I
Mm.
do the actual 3 coins. So you see here, you've got the vines coming up and making a heart shape around the top card. And to me, the two of coins, because the previous card is the Two of Coins with that like a drive band, like a belt around him. And I often see that as like an engine revving up, like you're doing preliminary work, you're getting ready to do something. And in here, your project is flowering. You've poured your heart into it. And
Mm.
and you're getting results. Another thing this makes me think of is like that old saying, "Do what you love, and the money will follow." So
Yeah.
the heart and the money.
Because it's
But
almost like, the top floral pattern, almost like, I guess, like it's sort of like the shape of the heart around the top coin by the florals, right? So we can see that, like, the love what you do. Yeah.
yeah. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's I got that from that. So what the major arcana, the trump cards in this deck are identical to the Soprafino deck. Um, and here's here's a the Soprafino has been done quite a few times. This is Lo Scarabeo has a series of it's called Anima Antiqua, and so these really lovely, and especially for Americans, so many of the decks I'm going to show you, I had to send to card makers in Europe, and the postage is like at least $25. But with Lo Scarabeo, Llewellyn is the American outlet for Lo Scarabeo cards. So you just go to llewellyn.com and you can order any of their Anima Antiqua or their Visconti-Sforza decks, and you don't have to pay outrageous postage for it. So, so the Soprafino deck was done about in the 1830s in Milan. Um, it was carved by it was actually a copper engraving. Almost all decks were woodcut, but this was copper engraving. Just like the world card I showed you, uh, just very intricate, very elaborate. At that time, it was one of the most beautiful decks anybody had ever seen. So they
Yeah.
called it Soprafino, super fine.
Mm.
and here's like those same two cards, the Three of Swords and the Three of Coins. It's it's very graceful and elegant, but not nearly as expressive
Mm.
as as the other deck, as the ancient Italian. So I really prefer the ancient Italian to this one, but this is a pretty
Because the
incredible deck.
ancient Italian was sort of like, I guess, the copy of Soprafino, but with additions. Was it by Avondo or Alondo brothers? Was it?
Yes, the Avondo brothers. Uh,
Yeah.
that's another thing that really annoys me. That's like the Avondo brothers have just gotten uh, lost in the shuffle. But I do have a couple of articles on my website about them. They were like the biggest card manufacturers in Piedmont. In fact, I think they closed up in like 1980 or something like that. I mean, they were there, and they really big for many years.
Yeah, I
So
learned about them from your website, from your blog post. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And yeah, so with the copper engravings, it was like the new game, like it's a whole new game, right? Like in terms of beauty of the cards, because we know how Michele Tarot is beautiful earlier, right? And then the Piedmontese decks, but because of the new technology, I guess, if you will, right, that they
Mhm.
used for that. Yeah.
Right, yeah, but yeah, not very many decks were copper engraved. Like
Mm.
Mitelli was a special commission. Um, you know, that they were almost all woodblock decks. So
Yeah. Which I, of course, love wood blocks. I'm known for loving wood blocks. And many people, say that when they discovered Tarot de Marseille, after coming from illustrated decks, that are just simplistic. So it's like many people say that they thought Tarot de Marseille was ugly in the beginning. When for me, when I first saw Tarot de Marseille, and it was the first deck that I actually had was CBD Tarot, of Bendo's, I found them extremely beautiful, those cards. I just kind of, it's something just clicked. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, I think it depends. As you know, I mean, some of those woodblock decks, you could tell they were really they were in a hurry to get them out the door, and the carving is kind of awkward, and then the stenciling, they're just blobs of ink here and there, and then some of them are just really well done. So
Yeah, so I'm curious now, before we kind of go and talk more about decks and your blog, because you started mentioning decks, and where now? So your preferences, you started with RWS, you moved into historic decks, so so your preferences changed in that way. So now, do you still prefer both kind of, what I'm saying, like traditions, illustrated versus non-illustrated? Or do you lean more towards more historic, non-illustrated peep decks?
I really lean towards the Tarot-de-Marseille. I do want to get more into reading with some of the really old Italian decks, like the Visconti-Sforza and the Modrone. But I do. I like fully illustrated decks that are really well thought out and come with a big book, where the deck creator uh, explains just what they were thinking, and I don't necessarily just repeat what they say, but to me it's a very rich experience. Let me show you one. Let's see if I can find where I
Yeah, I
put
just
it.
wanted to ask you about to give examples of those type
Yeah,
of decks. Yeah.
I think this is it. Yeah. Um, and this deck has been around for a while. It's the William Blake Tarot by Ed Buren. He is Mary Greer's ex-husband, and she had some input into this deck. So some of the card meanings are, echoes of the Waite Smith. But what he did was is basically collage William Blake's actual art. That's the World card, and he had put an extra Eternity card in there, and this is the Emperor. William Blake was not happy about rationality and reason and computations, and so he saw the Emperor as this really repressive figure who is just measuring out everything, and this is my favorite. I think I used to have a poster of this star card, and this is John Milton, the famous English poet who went blind later in life. and
Mhm.
and I think yeah, there's like Gemini, and there's some astrological things up there, and I think it was actually taken from John Milton's birth chart. William Blake, one of his closest friends, was a pretty famous astrologer, and they used to sit around and talk about astrology and metaphysical things. But this comes with a book. I mean, you could spend a lifetime studying this deck and also going back to Blake's original art and looking at that, looking what Blake intended, looking at what Ed Buren intended with his deck. So it's things like that. It's like a deep study like that.
Yeah.
Um, but as to where I am now, maybe I should talk about my love affair with Pierre Madenier.
Yeah. Well, actually, I also wanted to ask you, like, where are you now? And well, like, once you mentioned those decks, you know how there are different camps. I'm like both camps. Some people prefer facsimile decks. Some people prefer redrawn. Like when it comes to Tarot de Marseille, some people prefer very like cleaned out Tarot de Marseille decks. Where are your stands there? Do you prefer more kind of authentic facsimile like? Maybe.
Yes, I
Yeah.
do. I've found even though a lot of redrawn decks are really lovely. In fact, I'm going to show one that I got recently that I really like because of the colors. But I find, I don't know, there's just something kind of cold or remote or impersonal about them. So yeah, I prefer facsimiles, not ones where, you know, a sloppy apprentice has blobbed ink on it, but you know, some of the ones that are well done. And Pierre Madanier is that one. So I'll show you two, the two that I use. He's been actually been done a bunch of times, but the first deck I got was from Yves Reynaud. Um, here's the box, and actually Yves, because I set up my website in 2011, and I think it was very shortly after that that he started up his business and he started his website as well. And I think this deck is the first one I purchased from him, and it might be the first one that he did. I would have to double check on that. And it comes with a lovely envelope, because back then when you bought a deck, it was wrapped in a paper envelope, and it usually had, you know, fancy engraving there, and information about the card seller, his address and stuff. So that was neat to have that. But it was a totally magical experience for me. I've never felt this way before opening opening a carton until much later. A couple of Marco Benedetti's decks have given me this feeling. But when I opened the box, it was like, oh my God, you know, it's like a previous century is just sitting there in this box. And I saw and felt something flew out of the box and it grazed my cheek and then disappeared. And I thought, oh my God, a tarot fairy jumped out of the box. You know, it's like something magical is happening here. And I just fell in love with the deck. And uh, here's just, you know, a few. I think I've got it shuffled up here, so, but here's like the Page of Cups, and so you can see it's very nicely engraved, and the colors for the most part are stay within the line. They did a good job in his workshop of and it's a face. What I really like about it is the faces. Here's the Bagato. The faces are they're kind of open and friendly, but they and kind of curious about what they're looking at, and sometimes a little bit skeptical. It's like, here's you know, the Pope is kind of, you know, giving somebody the eye there, and she's like, "What's going on over there?" And see if I can find another.
Yeah, but definitely Pierre Modenier is probably one of the most delicate Marseille tarot decks, and I label it the most beautiful when it comes to aesthetics, the most beautiful historic Marseille deck we have so far.
I don't know, maybe it's just me, but I just noticed. It looks to me like he has a pink beard. You know, it's like, you know, maybe it's supposed to be tan, but it looks pink to me.
I'm
So
with pinks. I like pinks.
so I read with this. I've been reading with this deck, I guess, since 2012, and then Marco's deck came along, and it's interesting. I have never paid much attention to cardstock. I wouldn't know how to describe cardstock. I guess because all the decks I own were basically, you know, commercial decks with the same kind of commercial cardstock, and so the feel of the deck. But then I got Marco's Pierre Madenier, and his decks, the paper that he uses, the you know, it's like 2 layers of the laid paper. It is so different. It's just such an experience shuffling and handling these decks. It's like I don't want to handle any other decks now except Marco's.
Same, you see, like the same, because even, you know, when I travel, I used to take plastic decks or mini decks for my travels. Now, if I travel for more than 3 days, I'm like, okay, fine, I can have a basic mass market deck with me in my bag, but I miss a handmade deck. You know, like I just need to have at least like handmade majors when I travel because I cannot function.
I know.
Like problems, right? Like so spoiled with Marco's deck. So like I just need a majors deck so I can just have it, like, you know, just have it next to
Oh
me
yeah.
in a hotel.
So just his colors, he reproduced them really faithfully, um, and the reds, these deep ruby reds. So many people. Um, let me see. Let me look at see if I can compare here. I don't know if Eve did it a whole lot, but I've gotten some decks where um, the red was shifted really badly towards orange, and
I think with
there's two
Eve,
different
I
cards.
think the one that you showed was the earlier edition, and remember he did his later edition, and it was saturation was very different in color.
Oh, yeah, I think of what I've got here is the second edition. I've stayed. People tell me, switch to the second or third edition because they're so much better. But no, it's like I've fallen in love with that first edition. It's interesting. I've heard people talk about bonding with their
Mm,
decks, and I've often thought, how do you bond with pieces of cardboard? This doesn't make sense to me. But I am bonded with Yves Reynaud's first edition of the Pierre Mardinier.
yeah.
But yeah, here, yeah, you can see the different, but you can see Yves' color on the batons is a
Mm,
bit lighter. It's shifted just very slightly towards the orange. I've gotten some decks that
mm.
were really orange, and I hate orange. It's my least favorite color, so that totally ruins a deck for me if the red turns up orange.
Yeah, Marco's one is, yeah, it's one of my favorite decks. And have you noticed how with Marco's late paper, when he prints his Marseille Tarot decks, the orientation of the lines is vertical. And
Hmm.
when he prints Italian decks, the orientation, the lines are horizontal.
Oh, I didn't notice that.
Yeah, well, I begin to notice now, the more I shuffle them, I begin to notice it in shuffling. But yeah, he's Marseille Tiaros and Sarton as well, the Flemish one, the Belgium one that he just released only this year.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, it's the orientation of the paper lines of the late paper. They are, yeah, they're vertical. Mm.
Yeah. So when we're talking about the difference between um, a facsimile and a redrawn one, I think if I were going to branch out from the Mardinier, from the strict Tarot-de-Marseille type 2 style, I really love Swiss decks because they're so colorful and they're so fun. And as far as I know, there are only two complete Swiss decks in museums. There's the Burdel and there's the Gassman. And Yves Reynaud has done a facsimile of the Gassman deck. And and I'll show you a couple of cards. Really colorful and fun. Here's the Hangman. He's like the most colorful hangman I've ever seen.
And
And
very Swiss. Yeah, that's a characteristic of a Swiss deck, right? So more like a military-like looking hangman.
yeah, he is kind of military looking, and just all the flowers and berries and stuff, and the batons. And here's now he has a blue beard instead of a pink beard. And I love the two of cups. There was the heart with the horns down there. It's like proclaiming your love to the world. I'm in love. And then the sun. That sun is really wild. Yeah. So this is a facsimile, and a Spanish um, card maker, Irene Torres, went to the museum. She studied both the Burdel and the Gassman, but she said she also went to museums and looked at partial decks that have never been printed because they're so fragmented. But she studied a whole array of Swiss decks, and then she came up with her own blend, her own take on the Swiss deck. So this is a redrawn. This is her drawing. So this is the Sun card and Queen of Batons.
Very vibrant.
Yeah. So like I said, I really don't care for redrawn uh, cards. To me, there is something impersonal about them, but the colors are so vibrant that I think I really want to study this deck and use it. I just, um,
Yeah,
oh,
with the deck that you just showed by Irene, like I wasn't planning to buy it, but my friends convinced me to, like how sometimes you have a bit of a friends. And yeah, but what I love about it, the paper, she used the most, like, the paper feels so nice. It just
Yeah,
feels
oh
like,
yeah, it does. It almost feels like. In fact, I'm going to show you one in a minute that has a soap finish. It almost feels like those old-fashioned soap
mm,
finishes. Yeah, really nice paper, lovely, vibrant colors. Yeah, this is a deck I would really recommend to anyone. And
mm,
while we're talking about the Tarot-de-Marseille, um, put these away. Um, I'll show you the Nicolas Rolichon and two versions of that. Um, Marco Benedetti is really the one who brought this deck to life. The deck itself has disappeared, or maybe it's in somebody's vault somewhere. And, somebody, is going to discover it and will have the actual deck. But it only exists in a magazine article that was published in France in 1919. And it was just black and white drawings. They showed the entire 22 trumps, and enough of pips and court cards in each suit that it would be easy to reproduce the deck because it really does follow the Tarot-de-Marseille Type 1 pattern really closely. So Marco reproduced the deck, and then he colored it. Uh, so here's just a couple of my favorite. In fact, let me show you the box first. This is his telescope box,
mm,
where you pull it out, and the cards are in there.
lovely.
But so it's not redrawn. It's the original lines from the magazine article. But I love his reds, just these deep ruby reds. And this deck is just, to me, it makes it really easy to read with because the colors are they're so rich, and there's just only a few of them, and it just really makes the image stand out.
Mm,
And so I want to show you a very different version of this. Um, a guy who is just, maybe in the past several years has started making tarot cards. He's from southern France. His name is Florent Giraud. And I got a Rolichon deck from him when he was first starting out. And he says that back then, anyways, he told me that he doesn't. If there's cards missing, he doesn't recreate them. He's a card maker, he's not an artist. So he just does facsimiles of what there is. He doesn't touch up or anything like that. But here is the same deck. And here's the Popus. But he used colors that were popular at the same time that this deck was published. That other card makers um, in Eastern France were using. So
mm,
it's very, very muted. And there's another one. And also, he finishes it with soap. Um, I don't know if you can. It's kind of this coating is kind of shiny, very kind of slippery, has a really nice silky feel, and he added lavender scent to his soap, so so when you open the box, it really smelled wonderfully, but the scent is faded now. But this was standard procedure. This is how cards were finished. You probably had children or apprentices with their bar of soap, soaping up the cards before they went out the door because it would be a little bit of protection from greasy fingers or from spilled wine or something like
mm,
that.
yeah.
Um, and also, Florent, it comes in a handmade box that has some little cutouts appliqued to it, and it was a handmade little sturdy cardboard box. And he just posted something. He's moving into a new studio near Aix-en-Provence, where he's from, and he said he found he didn't like the idea of like sending cards out to China to be printed. He actually found a printer in his area in southern France. So he's doing handcrafted soap things like this, but he's
Mhm.
also going to be having some of his facsimiles uh, printed, in large quantities. So they'll be a little more affordable. And I forget what else he's done. Maybe about 3 or 4 different Tarot-de-Marseille facsimiles. So he's a guy to watch out for. Florent Giraud. He's just getting his start.
Yeah, with the soaped ones, I only have the ex. You probably know Agnès Caplet from Cartagram, based in Paris.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
no, I don't have any of their decks.
yeah, I've got her, and like her craftsmanship is just amazing, and she does soaping. But also, what's nice with soap decks that if you use them a lot, like the soap will wear out, but you can resoap them yourself in with the original soap.
Oh
Yeah,
really?
yeah.
Okay.
I mean, not original. You can just buy like organic, good quality soap. Yeah, because I've done it because I've got a Payen deck. I like Marcos Jean Payen, the 1743, and I have also one made by Cartagram, and I did resoap a couple of cards. Yeah, so it's just a really nice experience.
So what do
Yeah.
you do? You just take the bar of soap and you just rub it like.
Yeah, you just do that. Yeah.
Oh
Well,
goodness.
yeah. Like Shell David, you probably know of Shell David. He does it in a very complicated way, but no, the soap is okay. The bar of soap is okay as well. Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
yeah. In fact, I guess it was the glue. I was trying to think. I have a deck by Justin Michael. That's
Mm.
I think he soaked it. It was like he was just trying some stuff out, and he sent me a deck that was soaked. But the glue, he made his own glue. The kind of glue that they would have used, the paste glue. And the deck I have, he actually set the pan of glue out underneath the full moon for a
Yeah. I
couple of.
have the same. Yeah,
You
yeah.
have that same thing?
Yeah, he made the doll for me as well for my like birthday, whatever gift. Because Justin is a good friend of mine, and using Shell's redrawings, and also I've got the Bernardine Suzanne Majors, also Shell's redrawings. But yeah, sewed by Justin, but glue was done under the full moon.
Moonlight glue. Yeah, that's wild.
Yeah, and they smell nice because of soaping. Yeah, and absolutely. Yeah, I haven't asked you like now that we're talking about historic decks, Cheryl, about your website, right? About Tarot Heritage website and a blog. What inspired you to start it? Because you mentioned how you kind of started through like the Yahoo blog where you learned about the 15th century decks and then you were taking notes. But what inspired you to start Tarot Heritage and to actually write such great articles,
Well,
very researched articles on decks? Yeah.
it's kind of an evolution. Like I said, I was just on fire to know everything about Tarot history and how it all fell together and how the all because participating in in an online group, you would get pieces of information here and they're very fragmented, and I wanted to put it all together. I wanted the complete narrative. I wanted to know how everything fell into place and related to everything, and I was just obsessed with Tarot history. And I'll show you the deck and the card that really inspired me.
Mm.
um, I think it was probably one of those first decks that I bought from Elita store, and it was the Visconti-Sforza. This is by Del Negro. This is the actual size of the original cards. They were about 7 inches high. And I opened it up and I looked at La Papessa, and I was just mesmerized. This She really drew me into tarot history, and especially to wanting to know everything about the 15th century and its origins and the culture that it came from. And I looked at this and I said, what on earth is going on here? Why is this woman wearing a plain brown robe, but yes, she has this triple layered gold papal crown? And and I asked myself, why, in a time when people were primarily illiterate, especially women, why is a woman holding a book? And of course, that shows how ignorant I was, because actually, in fact, I just saw the statistic the other day. In the cities in northern Italy, especially Florence, um, there was 75% literacy. Northern and central Italy was the most urbanized uh, part of Europe and had by far the highest literacy rate, and especially upper class women and nuns were literate. So nothing unusual at all about a nun or an abbess holding a book. You would assume that she would be literate. And of course, I didn't know that she's actually dressed as a poor Clare. Um, and that's a question that's still puzzling me, is why, because this deck was commissioned and probably designed, the patrons of the deck were the Duke and Duchess of Milan, Francesco Sforza, and his wife Bianca Visconti-Sforza. And when back then, art was very much propaganda. You wanted your art to glorify you, to proclaim all your great deeds to the world. And the Visconti Sforza, I'm pretty sure they had a lot of impact, a lot of input into what the cards look like, and because a lot of them do kind of relate to family history. So why were they featuring a poor Clare, which is the female version of the Franciscans? Because they were the city of Cremona actually belonged to Bianca. It was part of her dowry, but she was always associated with it, closely associated with the church there. And I think they were Dominicans. I'm partway through a biography of her, and there must be some special connection to the Poor Clare order. But that's something that's really puzzling me. It's like, why did they make, because in other Popist cards, she's just kind of a generic religious person, and it's basically the card is about an allegory. It's an allegory of the church, an allegory of faith. None of this heretical stuff that people have tried to to pin on this card that has nothing to do with it. So anyway, um, she's kind of like my muse. She led me into all this stuff. And I'm trying to think back then, how did I learn more about Tarot history? Um, I think one of the first books I got, and I recommend everybody get this if they're really interested, is Stuart Kaplan's Encyclopedia of Tarot. It's in 4 volumes. Um, if you're just interested in the history, volumes 1 and 2 are the ones to get. 3 and 4 are almost all contemporary decks. And if you can only get one encyclopedia, and they're big door stoppers, but they only cost like about $35 or something. They're not really expensive. And volume 2 has a lot about 15th century decks. It has a lot about biographies of all the Viscontis and the Sforzas. Uh, and it's basically, with these 2 decks, let me show you what a typical page looks like. It's hundreds of pages of just about every deck that exists in a museum anywhere. I mean, you've got the entire world of Tarot at your fingertips if you have these encyclopedias. So, I can't say too much about them. So I'm pretty sure that reading those 2 encyclopedias cover to cover was probably part of my education. Also, The Game of Tarot by Michael Dummett is like the classic, and I have that. I think when I bought it, probably well over 10 years ago, it cost me $250, and the last I checked, it's still $250. So at least it hasn't gone up. But yeah, it's just an incredible amount of very detailed information in there. Um, And
Yeah.
so what I started doing, I think it's probably around 2003, 2004. I belong to the American Tarot Association, which I think still exists, but I have no idea what they're doing. I used to be on their board, and I'm very unhappy of how they've just kind of aren't doing anything anymore. But back then they were a little more active, and they had a quarterly newsletter, like a little magazine that they put out just for their members quarterly. So I started writing a history of Tarot. I plunked through Tarot history from the very beginning up to the present. Probably took me 2 or 3 years of publishing articles quarterly. And those articles really became the basis of the history section of my website. Um, I I was so excited about tarot history. I wanted to tell the whole world about it. Um, so yeah, that history section was really kind of the foundation of of my website, where there's quite a few pages, but I go through uh, tarot history bit by bit, and you could just scroll through in with illustrations. And that's another thing. I could just upload illustrations, which I couldn't do in tarot in the in the newsletter. It was just all black and white, and I don't know if there was any illustrations at all. So
Yeah. Yeah, and your Tarot Heritage website has been such a great resource for me since pretty much the beginning, once I discovered Tarot-de-Marseille. And I also know too many, but for those of our friends and viewers who are watching, that's I just highlighted, that's the website tarot-heritage.com. And it's a wonderful, wonderful resource with a number, like multiple reviews of incredible historic decks and articles that Sherryl has written. Yeah, no, I absolutely recommend it to everyone who is interested in tarot history and historic decks.
the part of the website that I'm really proudest of, that was the most work, took probably 2 or 3 years, because I procrastinated every once in a while, and I also had a co-author with it. His pen name is Iolon, Eolone, or I asked him how to pronounce it once, and he wouldn't tell me. He said, you just pronounce it any way you want to. So it's Iolone or Eolone or something like that. But we collaborated on the articles, and I go through all 22 trumps, and we take their development from the very earliest Italian decks all the way up through the Waite-Smith deck, and actually a few contemporary decks too, because it was really important for me to convey to people that, especially here in the United States, it's like the Waite-Smith deck and the Golden Dawn astrological attributions and all that, they're synonymous with tarot. Most people don't even know that there's other traditions out there, and that maybe some of the definitions, some of the ways that people interpret these cards aren't really optimal. That a lot of it has been imposed by Golden Dawn, symbolism and stuff. So we really show how each card started in the culture of 15th century Italy, and then it kind of transferred into France and went through in the 1500s, early 1600s, kind of a transition where there were kind of quirky decks, and then all of a sudden, it's interesting. It's almost like the Tarot-de-Marseille does the same thing in Europe that the Waite-Smith did in the United States. It took over. It's like that's the deck. There's practically no alternative, and so you have this long Tarot-de-Marseille period, and then you have the occultists really hijacking Tarot and saying, no, Tarot is actually, embedded in Kabbalah, and you got to know Kabbalah if you, if you want to read Tarot. And then we go into how the Golden Dawn really influenced how we interpret the cards, and then I think we end by showing a couple of really wild and crazy, very contemporary cards that really diverge from the whole thing. So it took us ages. He's a Dutch guy who lives in Africa. He's like the only African, only West African who has a tarot collection. So we were emailing rough drafts back and forth and picking out images to use and stuff. In fact, his website is tarotwheel.net, and right now it's down because he's refurbishing it, moving it somewhere, but it's loaded with images. It's all about images of cards and of related art, and I use it as a resource a lot when I want to find some art that's related to the old Italian decks.
Yeah, iconography that was used. Yeah, I did last year something similar. I had on my channel, I did Top Tarot Trumps series. The idea was is to choose five. Sometimes I chose more, five favorite of the same trump, like five favorite sun cards, five favorite magician cards of mine out of all the decks. But also I started adding history because I felt guilty that, okay, I can only choose 5 favorites, but I want to feature all of my historic decks. And I started doing something similar, like pretty much the progression of each arcanum from the earliest deck I have in my collection, which will be probably the Madrone or Marcos, version of Visconti Madrone, Rosenwald, and building it all the way up to contemporary. Yeah, so, but more through the video format where I can just briefly, very briefly, but because it's video, it's visual, just put the cards as like, yeah, the sun card, baby on a horse, not RWS original idea, type of thing. Yeah.
Oh, great. Well, that's a great idea and a lot easier than my process of writing and rewriting and sending drafts to Africa and back again.
But it's easier, but you should have seen the mess I made. Imagine like having 45 cards for each arcanum, like
Oh,
pulled out. Yeah, it was such a mess. Like it was actually very easy to pull them, but to put them back in all the decks is like, but I enjoyed it. It kind of connects you and allows you to look deeply into the cards.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
great idea. Yeah.
Yeah, so what other decks can you mention? We kind of progressing. You showed Visconti, a few Marseille decks. Have you got some other decks to share through like the history that you picked up and then you enjoying?
How about we talk about the 15th century, since
Yeah,
that's
let's separate 15th century. Yeah, sure.
yeah, I've got some decks right here. And a little bit of everybody. And
Yeah, I know you also have a favorite, like a few favorite card makers, as we all do in history tarot.
but for somebody who loves to read about history, Il Meneghello in Milan, they have done facsimiles of all of the old hand painted cards. Here's the Brambilla deck, and they come in these wonderful boxes, really sturdy boxes. And this is one that was commissioned by the last Visconti, Duke Filippo Maria Visconti, in about 1440. And what I like about this is they did the Visconti-Sforza, the Ercole d'Este, the Visconti di Madrone, and this one, 4 or 5 altogether, but each one comes with a book that was written by Cristina Dorsini. She is in charge of Il Meneghello now. It was founded by Osvaldo Menegazzi, and the cards are all his work, but he died a couple of years ago, so his niece, Cristina Dorsini, has taken over the workshop, and she is a tarot historian. So for each of these decks, she has written a book. And what she talks about the cards, but she talks about the artists that may have done the cards, related artwork. The reproductions aren't that great in this, but here's one. It's like, just to give you an idea, this is like an altarpiece that relates to the Brambilla deck, and then she goes into the colors of their hose. You notice that a lot of the pages wear different, their legs are different colors, and quite often you wore the colors of the prince or the duke or whatever that you were serving. And
Yeah.
so here's just a couple of cards to give you an idea. I love this guy. His hat is wild. It's like, I'm too sexy for my hat. It's like, and then the pip cards. We know that this deck was commissioned by a Visconti because we have his motto there, "A bon droit." And Francesco Sforza took that motto over, and you see it everywhere on the Visconti-Sforza pip cards on a little ribbon. And and another unusual thing about this is the 7 of Swords. In every other deck, you would have 6 curved swords with the odd 7 one coming up through the center. But in this one, you have like 4 on one side and 3 on the other. They do this for all of the odd ones. It looks a little imbalanced, but that's how they do it. instead of having the odd sword straight up in the middle.
Yeah, I just mentioned to you before we started the chat how Visconti Brambilla is very special, and I only have photos, but they're the photos I took of the original.
Oh my goodness, with the gold, yeah.
Yeah, white fingers there, that's mine. Yes,
Oh,
and Megateca di Brera. I'll show you the one that you showed you, the page. I think I
oh
have it.
yeah, wow, you really caught the light on the gold beautifully there.
Yeah, the light was very good because you could
Oh my
switch like the
goodness.
lights above. Yeah, so I can send you the original images. They're not really very straight, but the quality of the images is very good.
Yeah, I would
And
love
when I saw those cards, I went immediately to Il Minigello in Milan and I bought the book.
Oh,
The
did
book.
you? Oh,
Yeah. I was like, I need to learn more because I just was running on high. Yeah.
yeah, I have the complete collection, all 4 or 5 of their decks that they did, and uh,
Can you show a few others? Because I don't have, because you see, because they are not complete, I never really got the decks from Il Minigello on the Visconti decks. Yeah, yeah. If you can show some others, if you have them
okay,
prepared.
I have to go to the cabinet right behind me and get them. So
Yeah, yeah, no worries. I'll just say hello to people while here. So thank you so much, Ange, for being a moderator. Saskia, if you're here, hello. Rolf, Karina, hello to everyone. Mary, thank you so much for being here. And to you, Michael, it's so nice to see you here, all the familiar names. Tarot Geek, hello. Auntie Kay, not sure if you're here, but yeah, I did see your comment that it's beautiful, beautiful decks that Sherryl is showing. Hello, Maria. I think you are new to my channel. Thank you for being here. Yeah, and friends here in the comments, for those of you watching, do mention what decks you find we're talking about the 15th century, which decks you find especially beautiful. I just ask people to write in comments, for those who are watching, which of the 15th century decks they find the most outstanding.
so did you get answers?
No, not yet. I just mentioned because when you went, I just said hello to everyone.
Oh.
We have a number of people here, like Michael. You probably know Michael from Tarot History Group and Mary friends. Yeah, Saskia. I know Marco is watching because I got a Facebook message from him giving me his suggestion. But anyway.
Well, I'm gonna answer that question in a minute by showing you one of Marco's decks. Yeah, but back to Il Meneghello. Here is all of their books that Christina did. Yeah, there's the Visconti di Madrone and the Visconti-Sforza and the Ercole d'Este. And I'll show you that deck in a minute. And then the Brambilla, which I just showed you. And the d'Este, then you don't see this reproduced a whole lot. It's a smaller deck. I believe this is probably the original size.
Not
many
only
cards.
16 cards, but yeah, I thought it was be like under 20 cards.
Yeah, not many. There's here's the Bagato playing looks like a cup and ball game, maybe with some either children or just small onlookers. And and here actually the star and moon, Marco has used these in some of his decks as replacement cards. There's the star, actually 2 astronomers or astrologers looking up at the sky and pointing. And then the moon card is another astronomer who's actually looks like he has his calipers and he's plotting something out. So it's kind of a scientific look at the moon, somebody who's studying the moon rationally, like an astronomer
More
would.
like astronomy over astrology, yeah.
And the sun card is really interesting. This is totally unique to this deck. And what it is a story of Alexander the Great somebody told him about Diogenes, like Diogenes was the wisest man in the world, and Alexander wanted to go see him, and um, and and Alexander said, "Well, what can you tell me? I want to hear your wisdom." And all Diogenes had to say was Alexander was, "Move to the right a little bit. You're blocking the sun." You know, and that was it. That was Alexander's experience.
But they're
And
beautiful cards, especially the celestials, the sun, moon, star. They're so
yeah,
beautiful.
yeah, and it looks like there's a lot of court cards left. Here's like the Queen of Cups. It looks like. But I was delighted to get this deck because nobody else reproduces it. Like there's only 16 cards. This is really too many to fill in with your own art. You would actually be making a completely separate deck. So I'll show you my favorite one. And after I show you this, I want to go on to what the cards back in the 15th century, what ordinary people were using who couldn't afford, all that gold and hand painted. But this is, it's Marco Benedetti's personal Madrone. And so the cards are facsimiles, but what he's done is because in all of these decks, there's cards missing. So instead of trying to be very historically correct, he just put in replacement cards to please himself. and this deck, I think, is just so successful in how he did it. And there's actually two versions of the deck. There's the big full size version that comes in a wooden box, not
Oh,
cardboard.
you have two versions. I have the smaller one only.
Yeah, I'm going to show the smaller one too, but this is it
Yeah.
comes in this wonderful box. But then he did two versions of each. He's done the Madrone, the Visconti-Sforza, and what was the other one?
Well, he has Charles VI, but I don't know if he did it in a bigger box as well. I have it in more.
The Charles VI, the three of the Visconti-Sforza, Charles VI, and this one, the Madrone. He does two sizes, so there's that. But then he really wants people to use these and shuffle them. So there's about the same size as the Tarot-de-Marseille deck.
Yeah, that's the one I have. Yeah.
So I'll show you some of the larger ones. I think this is probably one of the more romantic decks. It was probably commissioned for the marriage of Francesco Sforza and Bianca Visconti, and that's the lover's card. It shows the two of them under a wedding canopy, and here it's the tower and the devil are missing from every single 15th century deck, hand painted deck. So we don't know if the people just didn't like these cards, so they purposely omitted them, or if these cards just didn't exist in the deck back then. But Marco has used artwork from about that time period for the tower and for the devil.
Yeah, I think these two are very successful cards. If you look at Madrone by Lo Scarabeo, I prefer Marco's choices for these two cards.
Yeah, I'm not familiar. But there's something unusual about this deck is it has the theological virtues, faith, hope, and charity. And I'm not exactly sure which is which, but and then what Marco did was he actually put a prudence card in there too, because people are always asking, where is prudence? You have strength, justice, and temperance. Why not the fourth virtue, prudence? And my personal opinion is it was never there. It was never intended to be there, that the three virtues are complete in themselves. But that's just me. And I love the star, moon, and sun series. They're all the same layout, with the gold back there and the thing. But they're actually I wrote it down somewhere because I couldn't remember. The star card is actually a painting for the 1800s about by the birth of Venus.
Mm.
And then the moon actually comes from the Vaqueta deck. And this was done about the 1890s. And I have to show you this. I had Marco do me. I love the Vaqueta deck. I had Marco do a special printing of it in gold on ivory. And
Oh, wow.
there's the same. It's what inspired this
Mm.
card.
Yeah,
But
because Marco, he kind of likes the reference, like Venus for the star, Diana for the moon, and Apollo for the sun.
right, and yeah, because that's what we've got here. Here's Apollo with his lyre for the
Oh,
sun card.
beautiful.
And then this card I think has the most beautiful world card. And people have been trying to, have been asking just what is pictured here. And I think some there was a magazine article where one scholar said that actually, if you stand outside of Milan, looking in a certain distance, if you were able to see all the way to the horizon, to the ocean, this is what you would be seeing. And somebody else said that, because Duke Filippo, who commissioned this deck, he really expanded Milan's territory. He grabbed a lot of the surrounding territory. And so they think that this is kind of showing maybe some of the castles and some of the towns around Milan that he latched onto. And so he's bragging about his conquests here. And then the
Yeah.
woman at the top, where you might expect to see a religious figure, a judgment, um, you know, or an angel or something. This is a very fashionable woman, and look at her hair. You see this a lot in other tarot cards and in art at the time. Women's their hair would be down to their waist, and they actually would have, it was like a wicker basket inverted that you would put on your head, and then you would pile your hair on it, and then you would have these elaborate brocade ribbons that you would use to hold your hair in place. Very elaborate hairdos. Um, and then you would also pluck your forehead. You would pluck the hairs, because very high foreheads were in fashion. So and she's lowering a crown towards the city, and so this might be an allegory of political power, of triumph. She's she's crowning Duke Filippo, saying, good work. Your army stole all these cities from other people, and here's your gold crown to reward you.
Yeah, but also visibly, she also looks a little bit like Bianca Maria Sforza, in some of the cards with her blonde hair.
Oh, it could be. Yeah, I read somewhere that that she had beautiful blonde hair, and that she was really kind of known for that.
Because, for me, this world card is one of my favorite world cards in historic tarots. And my first thing, when you look at the four castles and then the sea at the background, my first thought was, okay, Milan in the forefront, Venice at the back because of the sea. I also read in Helen Farley's books mentioning of four cities. But for me, this card, when I see it, I reminded again of my trip to Italy. I kind of look at one castle, the pinkish one is Milan, Bologna, Florence in the middle, and then Venice at the back next to the sea.
That could very well be.
No, for me, it's just kind of, that's what the sense I made out of it, because
Yeah.
of the sea and because, I think I read it in Helen Farley book. She kind
Ah.
of exposed it a little bit, but for me, it just was more personal thing. It's like, I like seeing that. It's more like a memory of my trip and my personal connection, I
Yeah.
guess.
Well, what's neat about this card is you can just project your own story into it if you want to.
Yeah, well, Michael is mentioning, and I haven't heard of it. So he said, I have heard some speculate that the fisherman, the little fisherman there in the card, may represent the Fisher King. I haven't heard of that. I don't know.
It could very well be, Arthurian stories, Knights of the Round Table, and Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, all of that chivalric stuff. That was really big among the upper classes there. So, yeah, there could very well be associated with that,
Mm.
or it could be some other literary association that we don't know about, some other myth. But yeah, I think that's when you talk about where tarot originated, who did the very first deck. Um, and there's all this speculation, that maybe it was done, uh, at one of the courts, like the Medici or the Visconti courts or something like that. But what's interesting about the tarot is there is nothing really. There's no story of chivalry or King Arthur or anything. If I were living back then, and if I were at a court, if I was, say, a lady in waiting, and I wanted to invent an amusing card game for the people at the court, I would probably do something about King Arthur, um, and Guinevere, or some of those chivalric myths. I mean, that was just so popular then, but that's not in the tarot. Um, and there is no classical myth. There's no Greek gods. We do have an example. Robert Place did. Recreated this deck because back in about 1420, the Duke of Milan's secretary invented a game for him. It was all Greek gods, but you don't have any of this Renaissance humanism in the tarot. What you have is Christianity. It's actually not a very fun deck. When you look at the cards, you've got political figures, then you have a hangman, you have people spinning on the wheel, you have old man time, the hermit, and then, there's the devil in the tower, everybody dies, and then if you're lucky, you're resurrected. It's really not a very cheerful story. Um, so my sense is that tarot was not invented in one of the courts, like the Duke of Milan's court or something like that. That it was from slightly lower down in the socioeconomic scale, possibly. Um, Possibly somebody, a cleric, somebody involved with the church or one of the confraternities. We have an example of that in Bologna in the 1700s. There was, it's why the Bolognese decks, they, instead of the emperor and the empress and the pope and the popess, they have the four Moors, because some guy got in trouble inventing his own tarot deck, and the church got upset with some of the stuff that was in there, so they made them change the deck. So you had the four Moors, but this guy was the guy who invented this tarot deck was the secretary to the Archbishop of Bologna. So here we do have an example of somebody who was embedded in the church, making up a card game. So I don't think that that's impossible, that a cleric of some sort, somebody who want to say, maybe he was thinking, if people are going to drink and carouse and play cards, well, let's try to inject a little religious symbolism and a little morality into it. And so they invented this game, and I'm sure there are probably other card games around at the same time, but this one just took off, and for a couple hundred years it was the most popular card game in Europe, which
Mm.
I find pretty amazing. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's very true.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
oh so what were the ordinary people playing with? The ruling class had, the cards, like the photos that you showed with of course they didn't play
All the
with those.
gold.
All the
Yeah.
gold. Well, those were for show. Those, you trotted them out. And when you think that the only illumination you had was candlelight and torchlight, and I imagine they just glittered, in that light. You bring them out after dinner to show your guests, the little, you know, so they'll be awestruck, just all that gleaming gold. Um, in fact, my one experience, I never got to hold decks like you did. I mean, that would be incredible. But it was like, I grew up in the East Coast, but I've lived in California for like 60 years. It was my first trip back to the East Coast. I grew up in a suburb of New York City. I went back to New York to look at some museums, and I was with a friend, and she had a friend who had been a docent at the Morgan Library, and the Morgan Library holds, a big chunk of the Visconti-Sforza deck. And so the friend was going to get us in for free. I wanted to go to like the Museum of Modern Art in the Guggenheim and really, look at avant-garde modern art. I wasn't interested in old-fashioned stuff. I almost didn't go. And they were having a special show then. It was actually illuminated manuscripts or illustrated books. I know they had some William Blake there and some medieval um, manuscripts, but they considered the Visconti-Sforza deck as being like an illuminated pages of an illuminated manuscript. They had the entire portion of the deck that they own out in one really long case. They usually, there's one part of the library, there's a little case, they usually have about 3 or 4 cards at a time, and they rotate them so they're not exposed to the light for very long. This was the entire thing. I spent hours just pressing my nose against the case. And what really struck me was how uneven the condition of the decks were, and the suit of cups, especially the cups court cards, were pristine condition and solid gold. You could hardly see the figures; they just melted into the gold background. Everything was like drenched in gold. Um, and another thing that really struck me was the lover's card is in terrible shape. Uh, you look at pictures of it, it looks red, mostly red, but that's because all this gold has peeled off and the gold was stuck to a sticky red clay backing.
Mm.
Um, and so that's what's showing there. And it got me thinking, I wonder, obviously this card was handled a lot more than the other cards. And I wonder if maybe it was used as like a Valentine, like whoever owned the deck would like give the lover's card to their girlfriend or whatever as sort of like a Valentine, or they pass it back and forth, or maybe they would hold on to it as like an amulet, to attract love to them or
Yeah.
something. But
And it looks like also some cards may have been hanged on the wall because in Visconti-Sforza, even in reproductions, we see like little holes on top of the cards.
yeah, a lot of those decks, it's not just the Visconti-Sforza, there's quite a few decks
Yeah,
have holes, sometimes top and bottom, and
yeah,
that's the only thing we could think is that maybe they were, in order to display them, to display them all at once, they were tacked to a board or something, and
yeah. And
and you
perhaps
would
like
hold it.
somewhere they have more light exposure as well, so they faded. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Yes.
that's those tacks are kind of a mystery, but tacking them up for display seems to me to be the obvious one, and it seems like everybody did it. I've I've found about at least 4 or 5 of those gold decks that have those holes in them.
Mm.
Uh,
Yeah.
so so the ordinary people were playing with woodblock decks, and unfortunately, not a single deck from the early years exists. There's two decks from the very late 1400s, from at least like 1475 or later, that only exists in sheets, because back then the way they didn't print cards one by one. They, each one was a wood block. But what you did was they printed them in sheets. There would be like 5 cards across and 4 down. It would be a whole grid of cards and one big massive wood block. So this is kind of what it looked like. I actually did a photocopy out of Stuart Kaplan's encyclopedia, and this
Mm.
is the Budapest deck. So this is what it would have looked like coming off the printing press. And if there was something wrong with it, if some ink got smudged or something, they would have to toss the whole sheet. And what they did was recycle them, and bookbinders used these sheets of playing cards as padding and book covers. Um, and every once in a while, a restorer will be taking a book apart to repair it and restore it, and wow, there's this sheet of paper. Sometimes there's legal documents, and sometimes there's sheets of tarot cards in there. And so that's why we know about the Rosenwald deck and the Budapest deck, because they come in sheets. And Sullivan Hismans, who's a Belgian card maker, um, he did a facsimile of the Budapest deck, And his decks, this came in another wonderful envelope. Um, and every time I hesitate to unwrap it because every time I do, it's I make a mess of things. But this is the wonderful wrapper that it's
Mm.
in, and it was just so magical to me to be able to actually, instead of just looking at pictures in books, to actually hold and shuffle the actual cards. It's just a totally different experience. And so here's some of my favorites. The Fool. Um, Somebody said it almost looks shamanic to them. It's like he has this long braid down his back, but he's got this big tree branch with a bell hanging off of it, and he almost seems like he might be leading a parade or leading a ritual somewhere. It's a very odd card. And the Lovers, I love this. The Cupid has shot his arrow, and the woman has caught the arrow. It's like, okay, buddy, are you gonna propose or not? And then oh, here's the Devil, and you could tell that the devil with a face in his stomach, but you could tell that the face has been strapped on. And when after looking really closely at a lot of devil cards, including the Tarot-de-Marseille, I think that the devil is actually a stage character. I think he's wearing a costume of he's wearing a devil costume. He's not supposed to be Satan himself. Um, if you look at the Tarot de Marseille, for instance, the devil, his antlers, his horns are coming out of a cap. He's wearing a cap. That's not growing out of his head. And in some of the cards, you can actually see like wrinkles. He's wearing like a bodysuit, and you can see like little wrinkles in it.
Mm.
And I love the Ace of Swords and the Ace of Batons, big cats.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah.
I love that. And then Hercules shows up in this deck. Here's Hercules wrestling with a lion. It's a strength card. Here is Hercules. It's hard to tell, but he's actually has a lion skin. He's wearing it as a cloak. You can see like the lion's foot down there.
Mm.
Um, and I think so. I think that that's telling us that these cards were possibly made in Ferrara, because Hercules, Hercule, um, was a favorite name for men in the family of Ferrara, and also Ferrara.
Mm.
They owned a they owned a printing press. They were known for printing cards, and the swords are really interesting here. They curve outwards, and they're kind of bundled in a crown,
Yeah.
and then you have this curved thing up there that's kind of holding them in place. So I really want to use this deck for reading, but I've got to think about how I want to interpret the swords. I don't think that you could just automatically transfer card meanings from the Tarot de Marseille when their swords look so different. You
Mm.
got to be true to what you're looking at, and I'm not looking at you know this oval enclosure that you would get with a Tarot de Marseille sword.
Yeah, definitely they would read very differently, and also addition of the crown. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, and I'm wondering if this deck was especially popular then, because for most decks we have like one copy. If we're lucky, we have one fragment of a copy in one museum somewhere. There's actually two partial decks in two different museums. I think one in Budapest, which is why it's called the Budapest deck. But there's another one in New York, I think maybe at the Metropolitan Museum. Also, there's a few cards in private collections. And also somewhere there's the stencils that they use to paint
Mm.
the cards, because what you did, you would have a red stencil, you would put the stencil in there, and then you slop the ink on. Then when that dried, you would put the yellow stencil on, and you would do your yellow. And if you were lucky, the apprentice was careful and he held the stencil in place and it didn't move, and you didn't end up with ink like a couple of inches off
Mm.
to the side. So we actually have two partial decks, some other cards floating around, and a stencil. So I don't know if that's just coincidence, or if this deck was so popular that so many were made that two of them actually survived.
Mm. there
And
is
then,
a possibility because they were common folk people, so you would assume there were a number of them made.
yeah, and it wasn't real common folk people who use these decks, because these the tarot still was a lot more expensive than your average playing card deck, because you had to hire an artist to design the 22 trumps, and then you had to hire a block carver to carve, do all this intricate carving. So these decks cost a lot more, so it was probably not rich people necessarily, but like a master shoemaker, somebody like that, or a fairly well-paid artist, or a shop owner who's fairly prosperous. Those are the kind of people who probably would be playing with this deck. The laborers who were stopping off at the tavern on the way home from an exhausting day of work, they wouldn't be playing a game with intricate rules. I can't figure out how to play the game. The rules are so intricate.
Mm.
I've heard it compared to like contract bridge, which I never understood either. So you weren't sitting around the tavern playing with an expensive deck with complicated rules. You were playing, gin rummy or whatever the equivalent was, or poker, with just a regular playing card deck.
Yeah, true. Yeah. Hmm.
So we have one other deck from that time period. It's the Rosenwald deck, because here again, it's just one sheet of cards that was found in a book, and it's now in the Rosenwald collection in Washington D.C. So that's where its name comes from. And Sullivan Hismans also did did a version of it. It's a facsimile, and this is taken straight from the sheet. There's the Popus card, and let's see what we have. Here's the Lovers, and probably possibly because this was a discarded sheet, possibly this would have been colored uh, before it went out the door. But to me, this was just so exciting to be to have to be able to handle cards like people back then did. But let's see if I can find it.
Yeah, and Rosenwald, I found it one of the earliest charming decks. It was so much charm. It's almost like the devil card, especially. It's so like folky, fairy tale-y,
Oh yeah. Oh, here we go.
adorable. Yeah.
Okay, I think I found what I was looking for.
And I know many people actually who like historic decks love Rosenwald Terra.
And actually, something about the Rosenwald. In Florence, back just before the 1500, uh, there was kind of a fad for block printed books that went back to the style of the very early days of block printing in the early 1400s. So, in fact, here's the devil. He is so cute, and he does definitely look like he's just a stage character.
Yeah.
But this very sparse linear style with no hatching, this was the way block prints were done in the early 1400s. And so I wonder if we did find a deck from like 1430 or 1420, if it might not be in this style, that we're looking at the kind of work that was done back then. And then Marco Benedetti did a Rosenwald deck. He's done, and he colored it himself. He chose the colors, and so here is Marco's version. This is one he. Uh, this is just one of the treasures of my collection, is his Rosenwald with the folded over borders. I don't know if you can see it, but those borders are not printed. They're what they did. In fact, all Italian decks are made this way until the late 1800s. You take the backing, a thin backing paper, and you fold it over to the front and glue it down. And it makes the deck really magical. This deck, it almost like whispers to you. It has this silky feeling, and when you shuffle it, it makes this kind of whispering sound. And I was really doubtful. I thought this thin paper folded over isn't it gonna fray? Is it gonna get torn? It didn't seem very practical, but actually, I've been shuffling this deck for a couple of years, and it actually makes the deck sturdier and more durable because the edges are protected, so you don't have frayed edges. But I'll just show you some of Marco's. And that's his devil. I love his reds. It's just this deep ruby red is just so beautiful. And there's the Ace of Swords, and and here's the World card. Um, a very
Beautiful.
Italian version of the world. You're having a globe with some kind of an allegorical figure or an angel standing on top of it.
Mm. Yeah, it must be so special to have this little deck with the Rivaltini borders.
Oh yeah,
Yeah. I
and
only have, I think, only one with Rivaltini, and that's the Mitelli.
oh yeah. In fact, I was yeah. Would you like me to show a few of those cards?
You continue. So we did 15th century. So we did illuminated cards. We did the Rosenwald and Budapest. What
And
next do you have on your list? Like, so just so we can go through history, while we doing it
well,
sort of more or less chronologically, if you can, and then we'll get to
well,
Vitelli.
maybe while we're talking about the Visconti-Sforza of the 15th century, how about if I show Marco's own Visconti homage deck,
Mm,
his gold deck. This is back in the 1990s. He did uh, all 22 trump cards as works of art to for a show with actual gold leaf, and I think maybe he also did tempera, which was what they used back then. And then he made a deck of cards out of it. And in fact, it's interesting. I kind of encountered Marco because we're both on the Facebook Tarot history page, but actually I bought his deck a couple of years before I even heard of him or he was even around. I was buying a deck on Game Crafter, and I thought, well, I'm buying this one deck. Why don't I just look around and see what else they have? And they had this deck with these beautiful, graceful, minimalist figures on it, and I thought, whoa! It just really attracted me. I just really just love the art. So I bought the deck, and a couple of years later, I'm scrolling through the Facebook Tarot history page, and there's a guy, named Marco Benedetti making a comment, and I thought, wait, this is the guy who did the deck I love. So
mm.
I said, are you the same guy? And that's kind of how we,
Oh, your
you know,
friendship started. Yeah.
yeah, that's how it all started. So he well, instead of talking, maybe I will just show that actually his deck has gone through a couple of versions. The latest version, it's actually I think his 25th anniversary version. He doesn't have titles. He removed the titles from the cards, and it's just it makes it so elegant with the heavy borders. And we're talking about how he likes whoops, I just lost it. How he with the sun and the moon and the stars, he likes to do Apollo and Artemis, and I just lost her. But anyways, here's the star and the moon from his deck.
Mm.
Artemis and I think that's probably Venus under the star. But just the gold is just stunning, and it's a very special gold. It's not the glittery gold that you would get in like a commercial deck or like some of the Scarabeo's decks that have gold. These is just very special. Oh, here's two of my favorite cards because I just love the lines of these cards. Here's the Death card,
Mm.
and just those graceful lines. And the same with the Hermit. I really like the Hermit. They're just so clean and minimalist. And what I like about the court cards, no faces for one thing, and they're really stripped down to their essence. Uh, to me, the way to interpret court cards in any of these historic decks is they're making a gesture and they're striking an attitude, and you can really tell what they are. I mean, this guy, he just looks, you know, kind of a bit paranoid and on alert.
Mm.
And here's, his gesture, he's offering. Like if you this comes up in a reading, well, what is he offering, and to whom is he offering it? So there's just something very elemental and very essential about these cards. And then here's like all the gold in the baton suit,
Hmm.
and then the swords are all blue with silver leaf.
Yeah, silver. Yeah, silver. Yeah, it's
And
beautiful.
Marco prints these himself with his own printer. This isn't cranked out commercially. And so I think I asked him for this. I use this deck. This is the deck that I use for my cards of the day, and let me show you it's a mini deck. And here's the size difference.
Oh wow.
And it shuffles so beautifully. There's just I don't know if you can hear it. It's
Yeah.
And I've been shuffling this. I don't know if And I thought, oh, how long is the gold going to last? I have been shuffling this almost daily for 3 or 4 years, maybe, and they're still in perfect
Perfect.
shape.
Yeah, beautiful.
These cards are just so durable. Oh, and here's the Ace of Cups. This is one of my favorite cards too.
And I'll just bring you in for the Ace of Cups. Yeah. So you mentioned from the trump cards, your favorites would be the Death and the Hermit, right? From the this deck.
Yeah, I think in this deck those are my favorite, just because they are so the lines are just so graceful. It just for aesthetic reasons. It's
Well,
my favorite.
my favorite is the Empress.
Oh, the Empress. Yeah, there we go.
I
Yeah,
just love the crescent moon. I love the artistic choices Marco made. I don't know, like when I saw the Empress, I'm like, yeah, I really
yeah,
love the cards. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
That's a great card. Yeah.
Mm, yeah.
So I consider myself just so fortunate. Oh, and another thing that he supplies with his decks, and I have this for the mini deck too, is he'll you can get like this little expansion pack, where especially like um, he'll give you choices like here's another tower card and yet another tower card, and like he has a whole bunch of oh my goodness, he's got five star cards
Mm.
extra, so you could personalize your deck. Or what I do with when I'm pulling my cards of the day with the mini deck, because I've got the same expansion pack for the mini deck. If say my card for the day is the star, I will I'll pull one of his extra star cards out at random and replace it, so that I'm constantly revolving, and it's the same. There's a lot of moon cards, tower, and a couple of others that you can
Yeah.
substitute.
Because he kind of mentions that whether they come from, different traditions, Marseille, Bologna, Charles VI, Ercole d'Este, Minchiate. He kind of gives a little bit on the box, like the reference of the
Yeah,
traditions.
that's right.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
So
he inspired, yeah.
you could tell what you have there. Yeah.
So I think, like for me, it's such a great educational deck, for people who are new to historic tarots. In terms of it's an image, it's a symbol in itself. This is it's a very good resource, because you
Oh
have
yeah.
the reference point to so many, well, to a number of historic traditions. Yeah.
So I think this is maybe the last deck I have. This is one also, I think, one of the most gorgeous decks in my collection. I think you've probably already done a whole thing on this, his Mitelli deck, Marco's Mitelli.
I
Um,
love his metal, yeah.
but just the fact, not only his paper has spoiled me. I don't want any other decks except decks with his paper. I'm getting to the point where I don't want a deck unless it has hand folded borders,
I
which ups
know.
the price a little bit. It's like,
Yeah. Remember he showed the new deck that he got, the Bardoni, the Milanese deck that he bought? Like in our chat, he mentioned Bardoni. I think it's the name of
oh,
the
yeah.
yeah,
Oh,
yeah. And I just hope so much that he would release the option with Rivaltini with this folded borders. Because I think
yeah.
it will be such a charm in a smaller size with those beautiful
Mhm.
colors. Yeah,
Yeah,
fingers
I
crossed.
I would definitely ask for that with folded borders. Yeah, because that's kind of in the Milanese tradition, and I've been wanting a Milanese. I have, you know, several Milanese decks in my collection, but I don't read with them. But I think if I had that one, and especially if I had folded borders, I would be shuffling with that, and reading with it.
Same, yeah. And it will be in a smaller size, those Milanese decks, they're only like little ones. Yeah.
Yeah. So here's just a few I think interesting trump cards from the Metelli. And here again we have the sun and the moon, Apollo and Artemis. You know, uh, see them everywhere. And what do we have? I love this devil sitting in the flames with a green monster.
Mm.
And in fact, the ancient Italian tarot. This is also the devil card. Um, Looks like this. Only the monsters are like crawling up his leg and wrapping around him and everything. Is much more gruesome. And it's interesting. Here's the tower. The tower is actually a person being struck by lightning.
Yeah.
And then the judgment card is fame.
Mm.
Somebody kind of announcing.
Beautiful, yeah, beautiful angel. I know that this one is Marco's favorite from Lucelli. This angel card is his favorite.
Oh yeah. Oh, is it?
Yeah, he mentioned that. Yeah, yeah. I think a while back when I interviewed him. Yeah,
And here's the Ace of Cups. Just really elaborate.
very pretty. Yeah. Do you read with Mitelli, Cheryl?
What did you say?
Do you read with Mitelli cards?
No, I haven't. I am kind of obsessed with if I do like a little spread for myself or something, I can't just do one deck. I have to pull the same cards out and like three or four other
Mm.
decks. It's like something I've just got to do. So I think I haven't done it with the Metelli yet, but the Metelli is certainly um, would be a good one to do that with, because then you get, it's like looking at the facets of a gem. Like if you pull out um, say the hermit card, and then you have like a Metelli hermit and a Visconti-Sforza hermit, um, and a TDM hermit. You've just got all these different facets of the hermit that you can just sit and contemplate, and it gives you, if you were doing a spread for advice, you've got advice from like four or five different voices instead of just one, if you just spread out one deck. So.
That's a good idea. I haven't done it. I do lots of comparison, but not when I do a reading of a few cards and then pulling the same cards from other decks.
Oh, in fact, let me show you how I go a little overboard with this. I have to reach for it, but I'll show you what my card of the day routine is, because it involves four decks, and I have it. See if I could do this without dropping everything. But I put so I don't take up a whole tabletop. I put them in this card holder. But you can see Marco's gold deck down there in the first row. So I pull the card with Marco Benedetti's gold, And then I pull out the same card here. We've got the Chariot and uh, the Three of Batons. So this deck, this is Lo Scarabeo's mini Visconti-Sforza. And above it is a mini version of Marco's Nicolas Rolichon deck. And then over there is the Rosenwald with the folded borders.
Oh,
So
wow.
if I have time in the morning, this is what I do: is I pull out the same cards from these 4 old Italian decks and one very new Italian deck.
Can you tell us, because you pull, I did see you mentioning on your Facebook page, I think, that for your card of the day you actually pull 2 cards, not just 1 card like many people do.
Right, because I think pulling one card makes sense, if you've got especially a fully illustrated deck. But what I like to do, in fact, whoops, this just fell apart, so I'm going to have the its leg fell off, so I'm going to have to set it aside there. Because I'm really not into spreads a whole lot. My way of reading is to pull. I think I got this maybe from Camellia Elias, but just pull 2 cards and read what's going on between them. A lot of times I blend them. It's almost like they're transparent, and I blend them together, one on top of the other, or sometimes I read the kind of the energy between them, the interplay between the cards. And I found that really useful. Like back when I was reading professionally a little bit, you'd have a client who just had so many issues, they didn't know where to start, or they were so confused, they didn't know what to ask. So just lay down 2 cards and start up a conversation about the 2 cards. And any more cards, I think, especially for somebody who's already confused, is just too much input. So yeah. And right now I'm doing a deep study of the pip cards, because actually that's something, a new section of my website I'm thinking of putting up, of instead of like using numerology or any other system to get your keywords for the pip cards, is actually looking at them very closely, looking at the vegetation, like does it make a heart shape, or does it going out, like spiking out like that. um, as, Basically what I'm going to write up is like a series, 40 sets of questions, of ways of looking at the cards, just to prompt a person to look closely and to really develop their own personal relationship with each of the pip cards. So to help me do that, what I've been doing lately is pulling. Actually, I've divided the deck so that I have all of the major arcana, all the trump cards, and the court cards together, all the figures, and I shuffle them separately, and then I shuffle the pip cards separately, pull one of each. So I've got a figure doing something, and I've got a pip card for them to interact with. And I look at how that works, and it's kind of a teaching tool for me to get to know the pips a lot better.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Yeah, I should start, because you see, for me, minimum, because I started with Camellia, so my minimum pool is 3 cards. But every time when I pull 2 cards, as my Lenormand brain switches on, in a way that second card is the adjective for the first one. So the second card describes the first one. It's just like my brain always takes me there. Even when sometimes I kind of do the deck, I just do 1 card from mages and 1 card for the rest of the decks. And then the second card always for me is the one describing the first one. I can't pull myself away from that. And it's probably because it's just, I'm so trained. It works. It's actually, if I pull 2 for the day, it always kind of a correct message. But yeah.
Yeah, it's like
Yes.
whatever you intuitively do is correct for you. I pretty much see them as it's like one thing, one energy. And I've gotten away from the 3 cards, because I know, like, that's just what everybody teaches, like Yoav, Bendov, the open reading, Enrique, we always did 3 cards. But to me, that tends to draw you into linear thinking. You've got past, present, or future. You've got this card, and then it's modified by this, and then this happens. It's plop, plop, plop. 3 steps. And so I kind of, and I found that 2 cards are just enough, and they're like, they're instantaneous. They're now. They're in your face. They're not a sequence. So so
No,
I'm
actually, no, I love this. Yeah, I should try doing it. And I like especially that you said sometimes they're more like if you, yeah, almost like, yeah, if you place one on top of the other in terms of like energy and how they would read, just like it's
Mhm.
something interesting for me to explore for
Yeah.
sure. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so what other decks now that you've shared? Decks from Il Minighello, you've shared a few decks from Marco, Sullivan Hismans. What are your other card makers, favorite card makers? Oh, you shared a couple of decks from Florent as well. But what other, do you have any other card makers that, like in me, in my kind of tarot history world, I have favorite 5 card makers, like more historic deck card makers. So my question is, who are yours?
Actually, the ones we've talked about are my favorites. I don't have any others, and I know you've mentioned who. I'm interested who your five are, because you did mention one that I don't have any cards from.
Yeah,
So
so my favorite ones are Marco. Absolutely love his work. Anya Skapler from Cartagram. So she has a card making workshop, and her decks are pricey, like yeah, but the very good quality, made soaped. She does. I can probably show you my payen from her. Um, she also does customized bags for the cards. I mean, not everyone is a fan of it, but they're like layered, and look how thick it is. So it's a 78 card deck, but
wow.
yeah, it's super thick.
Hmm.
And yeah, they're the bags that she did for me, and
Oh
they're
wow.
textured and layered because I love water. I live in Australia, so they're kind of more inspired by the ocean in Australia, and they are all slightly different, but it's kind
Oh
of a,
yeah.
yeah. So she does that. Or some people prefer original bags, and she would do that. But this is the Jean Payen type one that I have from her.
Oh nice.
Yeah, and I'll
Yeah.
just bring myself in there soaped, and she
Oh.
does send like a little soap if you want to resoap them yourself. But you see how the colors are, the texture.
Oh yeah. Nice. Very nice.
Yeah, so and she's such a wonderful person. She's just very intentional, very attentive, very detailed, and like yeah. I had her on my
Yeah.
channel a couple of times, so she showed like her workshop and how she actually does it. How she blends the paints for the decks, and yeah, but
Oh nice. Yeah.
yeah, so the back, yeah.
Yeah.
So Marco Agnes from Cartagram. I absolutely love Pablo Robledo. And Pablo Robledo's Marcela was my second Tarot-de-Marseille ever, and I'm a big fan of Pablo. I love Yves and I love Giordano.
Oh
Oh,
well.
Yves Reynaud and Giordano Berti. Yeah, sorry, like for people listening, I just call them by first name. But yeah, so it's Marco Benedetti, Agnes Kapler, Pablo Robledo, Giordano Berti, and Yves Reynaud.
Oh
If I
well.
had 5, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, those two I forgot. I do have Pablo Robledo. For a long time, you couldn't get his cards easily in the United States. There was a guy when Pablo first started out. He imported some of his cards, and I've got. I think I have his Vandenborre and another one when he was just beginning, and there was like 20 of them. He made 20 of them, and I got one of them. And oh, that I forgot. I do have a couple of Giordano's decks here to show. I forgot about him. um, because the I was saying the ancient Italian tarot, the Avondo brothers, that was from Piedmont in the 1800s, when really, elaborate, flowery, exotic decks were just kind of a fad there for a while. So Giordano did one. He actually did a couple of, because apparently card makers, you had to like print out a sheet of your cards and then take it to city hall or to the tax collector or something and actually record it and leave your sheet there. And Giordano found some of these and turned them into decks. And uh, here's the box. This is an Oriental deck, but he um, marbled paper with metallic flecks in it, really. And it's packaged. It's like a box, like a book. It opens like a book. And this deck is called the Oriental Foudras. This is probably one of the most exotic ones of the ones that he did. Um, kind of pseudo Chinese decoration was kind of was popular then. So this deck is kind of here's the Chariot card. It's in those lines. It's like a lady being carried in a sedan chair by four people, 4 men at the sides, and the Hangman is an acrobat.
I love this hangman. Yeah.
Yeah, and what's this? Oh, this is the lovers. This card kind of gives me the creeps. In the Tarot-de-Marseille, you have a man in between two women. Here you
Mm.
have a woman in between two men, and I don't know what's going on, but I don't have a good feeling about this. I have a feeling
About this card, yeah, yeah.
she's being coerced or something. It's not a happy card for me.
I
And
don't remember, like one il Minighello deck, is it no, Neoclassico, il Minighello Tarocco Neoclassico? I think it's a woman between two men for the lovers card.
oh, really? Oh, I'll have to look at
Yeah.
that again. And then
Yeah.
some of the cards they just reverted to Tarot-de-Marseille. They gave up on the Chinese motif, except the towers are pagodas in this one.
Hmm. Yeah, I'll try to find that lovers
Okay,
from.
and here's a pip card, a swords card. They're just really lovely and graceful and very decorative.
Yeah, so I found one. I'll just bring it in closer to show you. Yeah,
Oh,
so this one is from, you probably have a Tarocco Neoclassico from El
yeah, I think
Minighello.
I have it, but I don't like it, so I never look at it.
Okay, yeah. I don't use it very much, but I just remember when I did my top tarot trumps, when I went through all my historic decks, I just remember that there was one like woman and two male characters. Yeah.
Yeah, that doesn't look like a happy scene either. So.
Yeah, military. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, because Giordano also he uses wonderful paper, the printing on the paper, like it's just very
Yeah,
luxurious feel to the cards. Yeah.
yeah, and just so nicely packaged. The
Mm-hmm.
fact that one this is another one that he did. You don't see too many German decks, and this is a deck that he feels he's pretty sure that Mozart played tarot with this deck. It's the Miller. It's the Miller deck, and here we have the marbled paper again. There's the back. There's no metallic flecks in this one, and most of his decks they come in this gold lame bag inside the box, and then and they also come with a little booklet that is just for a small booklet. His booklets are always packed with historical information. And in this deck, this is a German deck. Actually, it's made in Salzburg, and it's kind of a happy deck, very kind of down to earth, sturdy characters, and it's a Besançon style. So you have Jupiter and there's Juno, and there's the star card, great big stars. But it's kind of a fun deck. But and I don't get this. This is the Hermit with a looks like he's dressed in his hiking shorts, but he has a Fu Manchu mustache, and he's kind of a strange character. And then here's one of the court cards, kind of a jolly swordsman there. But
Yeah.
in the book, it goes into a lot about Mozart and his diaries. He would list what he did for the day, and he would take a walk in the park and do this and that, and then he would play tarot in the evening. So we know that he played tarot, and this Miller is the only card maker that existed in Salzburg at the time, which was Mozart's hometown. So it's very, very possible that Mozart was actually using a Miller deck when he played tarot. So
It's a very cool story. I don't have the Mila deck. I have another. Do you have this one from Giordano, the Johannes Hester?
yeah, I have that one too. Yeah, Yeah, that's another German Tarot-de-Marseille.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
think this one is one of the most underrated one because I love this deck so much because of the happy characters that all the faces are so happy
Oh, yeah, that
and
is
so
a happy
like
deck.
picky. Yeah, so I love this one a lot as
Yeah.
well. Yeah. I'll just show people like one of my favorite death cards,
Oh,
smiling.
yeah, a laughing
Yeah,
skeleton. That's
yeah,
wonderful.
giggling. Yeah, yeah. So it's another one I love from Giordano.
So that is actually it. We've exhausted my pile of decks.
Awesome. But what about your contemporary card makers? You know, we talked about historic decks and people who make wonderful historic reproductions. Do you have like any card makers or deck creators who stand out to you in their artistic skill and knowledge?
Actually, I don't. If there are people making like one of a kind, or small edition contemporary cards, I don't know about them. I'm just so, obsessed with the historic decks that um, I do. I do use. I do have one out here. It's a low Scarabeo deck. It's kind of one of my favorite modern decks. It's just a mass market deck. But I went through a period when I was younger. I wanted to be a pirate. And I was so excited when I found out that there were women pirates. In fact, there was actually an American woman pirate from the coast. I think she grew up on the Carolina coast. Probably did not come to a happy end because she was arrested in the Caribbean, thrown in jail, and disappeared. So she probably died in jail. But Los Scarabeo has a pirates deck, and I had to get it. So here's a fun way to end our conversation. Here's a badass lady pirate right there.
Oh, wow.
And here's another one, getting a revenge on that guy. And oh, and here she's reading palms, and I don't know if you can see it, but there's a couple of cards on the table. So here she's a fortune teller telling the pirate's fortune. And then there's some really beautiful cards in here in this one, you know, um, an ocean monster.
Mm.
So
Yeah, so pirates for you. For me, my guilty pleasure outside of historic decks are all the cute, adorable things. You know, like kawaii style Japanese decks.
oh yeah.
Yeah, like Peeps Peak, you probably know Zara's adorable Marseille, like that kind of decks that I
Oh yeah.
like. Yeah, outside of my historic decks, that type of like cute, adorable,
Oh
bright.
yeah.
So, I mean, how can you not love the lovers card? Like,
Oh
I
my
mean,
goodness.
and look at the cups; it's just bunnies and strawberries and flowers.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, that is cute.
Yeah, but she did very well with the pattern. You see, like she kept the Marseille tiara, but just more added the cuteness. So yeah, that's me. When I don't use historic decks, I am like in the cute world of yeah,
A big
yeah,
difference there.
yeah. Very different from pirates, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's been so wonderful, Cheryl, and I know we've been for over 2 hours now. So
Oh wow.
yeah. But thank you so much for your time. And are there anything else that you had prepared, or we pretty much talked about everything?
I think we've pretty much done it.
Yeah, yeah. No, and thank you so much for sharing your story with Tero and how it all started for you and about your blog. Because I know many people, well, my friends that I know, we kind of knew of you for a long time because of the Tarot-Heritage website as the reference point, and we're so grateful for the work that you've been doing. But it's just so nice to learn about you, about your collection, about your tastes, about your daily draw, your card approach to the cards. It's just been an honor and was wonderful to talk to you.
Well, thank you. Well, I'm just so glad that I had this opportunity to share what I do. I really appreciate the
Yeah,
conversation we've had. It's been a lot of fun.
Wonderful, yeah. And we've had quite a few people. I kind of did say more like a group hello to everyone, but we had a great support here from our viewers, our friends here. And I know that people will be watching back as well over the weekend. I know, well, we both received messages. Some people are at work. For some people, it's a bit late at night in Europe. In Australia, probably some people are still sleeping, having breakfast. But yeah, thank you so much for your time, and thank you to everybody who stopped by and who interacted in the chat. Well, Sherryl's website is linked for you below. Also, Sherryl was very kind to send me the links to her favorite card makers, and I will include them once the video goes on YouTube. I will paste the links if you want to check some special decks that we talked about. And please, Cheryl, stay with me just a little bit for private post chat for a few minutes. But otherwise, we'll wish everyone a wonderful weekend. Thank you all for your time. And Cheryl and I will see you on our social media websites, Facebooks, Instagrams, YouTube for me very soon.
Okay, well, goodbye, everybody.
Bye, everyone. Have a nice weekend.